In public perception, a common misconception links secular individuals to immorality due to the assumption that without belief in a deity, morals are not possible. Recent research by Professor Will Gervais reveals this bias impacting political and social interactions, historical influence of religious authorities, complexity of morality, and projection contribute to this stereotype. Projection is when the negative qualities are projected onto others, when one's own or one's own group's negative qualities are projected onto others. Seen in stereotypes of Native Americans as savages or black men as predators. Interestingly, projection might explain why the stereotype of atheists as immoral persists. Theists may project their own moral shortcomings onto atheists to avoid self-examination. Ironically, non-religious people often hold the more compassionate, just stances on issues like gun control, climate change, immigration, and healthcare. The stereotype is flawed. Empirical data indicates non-believers often advocate for empathy and justice. This raises questions about the true sources of morality and who truly demonstrates it. Comes from The Sinner in the Mirror, Why Atheists Are Stereotyped as Immoral, on secularhumanism.org by Professor Phil Zuckerman in February-March 2023 issue. And Cynthia, would you like to take this?
Sure, I'll take it. It's so weird to be told that you are not moral because you don't believe in a God. And it's interesting that we have reports from multiple religious sources and organizations about sexual assault, about grooming, about financial impropriety, and downright theft that we are still saying them atheists don't believe in God and they ain't shit, you know? So I find it very interesting about that. But I know that I have panelists and hostesses that have more interesting things to say about this. Infidel, please tell me your about morality and atheists.
Well, I read the article and it mentioned free will and different arguments regarding morality, but truthfully, I think that misses the point. Christians aren't going to church over a serious philosophical position. They're just regurgitating what they're told on Sundays. They say their morals come from the Bible, but they really have no idea what the Bible says. In traditional marriage, the Bible sets a price for a rape victim to forcibly marry her rapist. Abortion, the Bible has a recipe for the priest to cause an abortion, but only to protect the man's rights. Christians deeply misunderstand what it actually means to be an atheist. They've been told so many lies about what it is. But for many of us, it wasn't a thing like changing churches like they would think. It's a deconstruction process, removing those bad ideas that come from the same place, oftentimes that they get in what they think are good ideas. I know that speaking personally, I'm a far more moral and balanced person than I ever could have been at church. I'm not defined by a lack of belief. I'm a father, a husband, a friend, and I hope sometimes a positive influence. You know, they look at their morality, but they have a God with a get out of jail free card. I don't have that. I don't have a God to forgive me when I do wrong. I live with those consequences. If you're good because of God, then you're just not good. As I said, it's my job to be a better person. It's not. It's not some God that's going to dictate that, and it's not a God dictating it to them. Now, Phil, what were your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, we usually hear that from theists. Oh, my morality is objective, yours is subjective, because I have objective God. But then you ask the question, okay, what do you mean by moral? What is morally? Let me use the word moral. What do we really mean? In my case, and I guess in the case of the others here, and I think they will agree, is that When we talk about being moral, we are talking about anything that is related to kindness towards others, where we also minimize harm to others, fairness, justice. I don't. I am still a bit puzzled as to what the theist means by moral, because, well, I was saying in some cases, some of them will say about, okay, yes, that is so, but usually in multiple cases is whatever God says. Whatever God says, that's moral. No, no. How do we judge that morality, right? Um, and so usually then you get these then persons saying, oh, but look at some of those atheist countries where they suppress and do terrible things to people like North Korea. But I usually point out to them, yeah, they might not hold a belief in the God, but the thing is that it is not necessarily their atheism that is causing them to do that. A lot of them set up themselves as a quote unquote idol, like in North Korea, right? So it's not really that. But when we look at the morality of church, and you look in history, you realize the church has not been so moral. And when they got into power, different denominations got into power, they everybody else suffered, right? And as someone correctly said, it raises the question when we look at the Bible. It talks about the morality. Okay, you want to say God is moral? What about the genocide? What about the slavery? What about the taking young women and for your from spoils of war and marrying them without their consent? Look at the misogyny. So on the other hand, usually, especially when we have humanist atheists, we care. This is what we call moral. We call moral justice, kindness, all of those things we relate to. And that is then using that we can judge whether or not your God is moral. Because that is it, not because a God says so, right? And again, it is I think, yes, it's projection, because a lot of them are projecting, and as we've seen earlier, sometimes people do there are persons within the church that do some very despicable stuff, um abusing children, practicing pedophilic behavior, pedophiles. So are they really any more moral than us? That's a good question. Are they? What do you say, John?
Uh, I don't think they're any more moral than we are. When I was reading this article, I found a lot of things that I was curious about. One of them is some of the historical references he made, like John Locke. I've read Locke, mandatory reading for political science majors. But I never came across this that he atheists should. This is in 1685, that atheists should not be granted any legal or civil rights because promises, covenants, and oaths are obviously meaningless to them. And that's just an idea how long this is cultural and societal indoctrination.
Can I just say, Jonathan and panel, what if that were today? Like, can you actually imagine, like, if they took that particular sensibility from the 1600s to say that any person that does not believe in God has no civil rights, has no say in society, you know, don't vote, can't talk against your leaders, etc., etc. I almost feel like that we're here today. I'm not sure. I just had to just put that in because I found that also very, very interesting. That this is an old sensibility that seems like it's actually coming back up again in some cases, away or forms. But I
Yeah,
digress. And
yeah,
Jonathan, please continue.
yeah. Well, the cultural and societal views and indoctrination are what caused a lot of the tropes. And I think it's at least 1,500 years that we've had Christian thought that had taken over. By 1,500 years ago, they'd taken over most of Europe, and this was a common thought at that point, and they were considered like heretics. There were some godless people back there, especially I know of one in Romania, but I'm not going to get into that. Clarence Thomas, thinking about today's problems we have with this, has suggested that taking an oath is clearly pointless for atheists because we have no supernatural power to swear to it or by. So, these beliefs still persist. And this guy's a Supreme Court judge. Well, he's not a very good one, and he's also not a very law-abiding one, but he's there. Um, uh,
His
After
morality could be
2000,
in question as well, if
yeah,
you
Oh
really want
yeah,
to go there.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll do a story on that some other time.
We probably will.
yeah.
Okay.
But 2,000 years of social indoctrination and bad branding, and most people intuitively and automatically see atheists as immoral. And the article, he really tried to dig into a little bit of why that is. Um, the the one point I liked was because morality is a philosophical, cultural, historical, neurological, and bioevolutionary components to it. It is one of the most difficult areas of human activity to understand or explain. And then he says in his notes, just take an ethics class, and what do we do with the trolley? He was referring to the trolley problem. So it is. And anybody who's studied any kind of philosophy will tell you that it's not easy to get through. So, says John, who's trying to nuke his way through Nietzsche again. Anyway, the dictator's problem. Well, we don't know for sure. The only people I'm sure didn't have religious views are Marx and Lenin. If you think about the others, Mao, Kim Jong Un, they have different forms of religion in the Far East that are not necessarily antithetical to communist philosophy. So we don't really know one way or the other if all of the hated members of the dictatorships of the early to mid 1900s, some periods of which I lived through, if they were truly anti-religion or not. I don't remember hearing that Mao destroyed any of the temples in China. He may have, but I never heard of it. So that's another point that I wanted to make. But it doesn't matter because it was the propaganda involved in that the anti-communism was also projected onto atheism. These guys are atheists: Marx, Lenin, Trotsky. There's a whole pile you could list. Pol
Right,
Pot.
right,
Yeah,
right.
and,
Hmm.
and so that follows that you can project that same problem with atheism. Whereas once again, this is a projection because they're the ones who want to basically ethnically cleanse and do all the things that they are accusing these dictators of doing. So but that's because they cannot internalize that they are that evil, even though they may be. So it's that unconscious thought has to go somewhere, so they put it onto other people. And this is social psychological projection is a thing, particularly an identity group, or at a groupthink kind of level. Like, people identify with a group. We talked about earlier about how with that kind of emotional coming from a isolation into a group, that group can do no wrong because you want to belong to that group. So that then when that group is projecting their distastes and dislikes onto atheists or other groups that are marginalized and basically powerless in comparison, that's what's happening. And he talks a lot about a social psychological projection in this, and it's a thing. And we can see it in everything. In the introduction, I mentioned American Indians. For 200 years, we were saying how brutal and brutish and savage they were. That was our own projection of our move westward. We burned villages, women, children. We did a lot of that. And then they claimed that the Indians were doing it. Even
Right.
in Prince Philip's, King Philip's rebellion in New England, they didn't necessarily do that. So it's like, I get that. Really, really kind of irks me a little bit. Phil Zuckerman is actually a professor, and he's, like I said, he's at the a university in he's at the university. Blah, blah, blah. Sorry, my mouth isn't working. And in California, as a professor of sociology and secular thought, secular something like that. And so this is coming from a guy who has spent his academic career studying this kind of stuff. So he really got into the social psychological aspect of it. And my opinion on the whole thing is that basically old tropes die hard because they have been indoctrinated, but not just indoctrinated, inculcated. They're part of our culture. And rewriting that script out of our culture is incredibly difficult. And we need some better marketing and better branding. And we have to be actively debunking this in the public sphere, in the public stage, if we want to start to make these people realize that you don't need a supernatural being or magic pixies or leprechauns to be moral. What you need is just a society that says it's bad to do harm to other people. And then people will be inculcated into that idea.
Right.
And that's what we need to do. And we need to get this Christian national takeover of the schools in the trash as fast as we can. So,
Agreed.
With that being said, I guess I'm going to hand it to you, Cynthia, to take us out, I guess.
Sure. Yes. Let's all go to a restaurant. It's on me.
I'll get on a plane. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. Get on a plane. Come on down. I'll take you out for dinner or something. I want to go back to something that you mentioned, Jonathan, about how communism in the modern, not necessarily the concept, but in practice, how it became analogous to atheism. And one of the things that I've heard when I used to be a Christian and I used to watch Trinity Broadcasting Network with Paul Crouch and Jan Crouch when she had purple hair, that they talked about when the Soviet Union was still in, still around and what have you, and they used to go to some of the summits and they would talk about, yeah, she had purple hair. Come on, y'all. She had purple hair. But anyway,
what's wrong with that?
But the thing about it is that, like, I remember specifically Paul Crouch talking about like how these particular regimes, like the USSR, because it was a communist state and China was a communist state and it was without God, then if the United States actually adapted these particular practices, that's what we will become, right? And I think that the problem that is often conflated with atheism is, I believe it's called statolatry. My mouth is not working right now, but it's basically but it's statolatry, and it's literally the worship of the state analogous to idolatry, worship of idols. So the glorification and the aggrandizement of the state or the nation is what we are actually aspiring to as a human collective rather than something else. And this is what we have in a North Korea. And this is what we had in the USSR. And this is where we had, because like one of the things that I even said to other people when, when they talked about, oh, that darn socialism, that's what the atheists want, you let this commie pinkos. And I say, yes, I believe pink all day, but that's just me. But regardless of that, we never really had a state of government where true communism and socialism was practiced. Never had it. Never had it. It was just concepts that were actually used in order for, as far as like, I cannot talk. I'm getting Jonathan's disease.
Power.
But yes, they wanted to use, no worries. I have this disease all the time. I was about to say you got Cynthia's disease. Regardless, they use these, thank you, Phil, they use these particular concepts in order for them to garner power. This is a dictatorship. This is, true fascism. And this is something that, we're constantly like, fighting to this particular day because we don't want it. But, the article, it actually brings up, the whole thing about, is morality objective versus subjective? And is it relative? Do we have free will? What is the epistemic conflict versus the ontological conflict? Oh my goodness, I just got triggered. Is Dr. William Lane Craig in the room? I feel the kalam coming down any moment.
Oh, no.
Wow.
Call the exterminator.
Exactly. But these are all like the very things that we hear on some of our call-in shows that come on Sundays, one at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, Talk Heathen, and also the Atheist Experience at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, where you can have these particular arguments with the host all you want to. Bring up the ontological argument and the Kalam cosmological argument and the whole thing about free will and realism all until you want. Regardless, that is not going to actually solve the whole issue about morality being subjective versus objective. And I am of the mind that morality is not objective. It is very subject to the individual and how we have been indoctrinated, like Jonathan said, into society. But I'm of the mind of like Sam Harris, even though like I'm not a fan anymore. But when it comes to when he said that morality and ethics are actually driven by well-being, I agree with that. Yep. We can't live in a society without laws and without some type of, rule that we're supposed to be going through. Anarchy is not the way. Sorry, Essex. And if you don't know who Essex is, it's a TNG reference. Look it up. My Star Trek people will know. But if we had any type of giving up of God belief, and I think that that's something that's happening as time goes on, as we gain more knowledge, and as we have regulated certain things that we thought was God to an actual natural phenomenon, then we can also see that in order for us to consider ourselves moral, ethical beings, we don't need a supernatural divining rod to do it. And with that being said, if you want another divining rod that's actually naturally imposed, that just means that you want to listen to more nonprofit content. Just click here.